when the man came up and said he's done everything, what else does he need to do?
Right. He goes through the first few commandments. Where else? Very famous sermon.
Last Supper.
Very famous sermon. The Sermon on the Mount. You know it. Very good. And where can we find the Sermon on the Mount?
Matthew 5,
6 and 7.
7,
It's a very long sermon.
3 chapters.
And then in Luke, I think also chapter 5, I think it should be said here. Luke chapter 6. But the best development of it is in Matthew's gospel. And Jesus talks about the commandments here. He says, you've heard it said of men of old, the ancients, thou shalt not kill. That's the commandment we're talking about, right? And whoever kills should be liable to judgment. But I say to you, everyone who is angry at his brother shall be liable to judgment. Everyone who insults his brother shall be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, shall be liable to the hell of fire. How many of you have ever gotten angry at someone? How many of you ever called someone names like fool or something worse? You should be liable to the hell of fire? Why is Jesus saying that? Is he just exaggerating?
Could you say that it's because any sin that you commit against a brother in Christ is a sin you commit against them?
It committed against Christ, right? Yeah, you can. That's very good. But
It's like how you talked about relationship, you're killing that relationship.
you're killing a relationship. I mean, what happens when you get angry at someone a lot?
You just hold resentment.
You start holding resentment, and maybe you start hating that person, right? What happens when you call someone names? They become your best friend? No, they could end up hating you, right? And that's oftentimes what we see happening. There's a hatred that builds up. And I think we see that in our society today. There's a lot of division and a lot of hatred, a lot of name calling, a lot of putting people in little, boxes. And when you do that, you create hatred. And so, what if you lived a good life, but because you got angry at someone or you called someone names, someone ends up hating your guts? But you lived a good life, and you're about ready to enter into heaven. And this person who hates your guts sees that and says, Lord, if you let her into heaven, there's no way I'm going. But this is an innocent person that, suffered a lot because of you. Not that, it's just that you got angry at them or you called them names or something and hated your guts. So if you go to heaven, this person's not going to go. Or if this person goes to heaven, you're not going to go. What do you think Jesus is going to do? So what does?
Whose sins are you retain or retained? Or,
Okay. Sounds like the gospel today in the Mass. But this is what Jesus says. So, if you are going to offer your gift at the altar, the gift of your life, at the end of your life, you're going to offer it to God. But remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gift there before the altar. Don't offer it yet. Go and be reconciled with your brother, and then come offer your gift. Make friends quickly with your accuser while you're still going with him to the court, lest he hand you over to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the guard, and the guard puts you in prison. I tell you, you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. So, by the way, this prison that Jesus is talking about is purgatory. The hell of fire that we were talking about is purgatory. So if God is trying to decide whether to let you into heaven or let this other person in the heaven that's hurt by you, he says, hey, you two have to go to purgatory and work things out. And when you can make peace with each other, then you both can go to heaven. You know, it's a little bit on this sense that, you know, and if we're the guilty one, we're the one that's going to have to suffer as we're trying to heal this relationship that was damaged. So you see how we, you know, Jesus doesn't say just murdering someone is a sin. He's linking spiritual murder, spiritual homicide, killing relationships as what, you know, certainly killing the body is an important element of that, but also killing the spirit is even more. And so as you're going through the outlines, you're going to see different ways we commit sins against the fifth commandment. But just always looking at, you know, most of us don't go around killing people, you know. But, I mean, physically killing people. But we do can commit sins against the fifth commandment. And that's what our Lord wants us to take responsibility, repent, and change our ways. And this is a challenge, you know. It's, you know, we're afraid of being wallflowers sometimes, you know, and I'm just going to let someone walk all over me, you know. And, you know, it's not about that at all, but rather it's really about, you know, having a good, that we have that life and have it into the full. You know, I came that you may have life in relationship with God. And we don't want our bad example or our name calling or our anger get in the way of someone embracing and accepting the life of Jesus Christ. And how many people have walked away from the church, or how many people have not approached the church because they just see Christians as hate mongers. Maybe it's one person in their life that went to church but created a bad example that they don't want to have anything to do with the church, with Christ. So that's, I think, is important for us to consider. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Dan and Rudy to talk about the specifics, ways that you can, you know, commit sins against the fifth commandment. Okay. Now I want to start meeting with people who are going to be receiving sacraments. Who's looking forward to being baptized this coming Easter? Alex, we're going to meet on Wednesday, right? So we can talk a little bit about that on Wednesday, okay? I know we're going to talk about the marriage things too, but we're going to talk about all of that together, okay? In that context. Who else is going to be baptized? Who's going to be confirmed, hopefully, in Easter? Megan and anybody else?
There's a lot of people online too.
And a lot of people online. People online, if you're going to receive sacraments, I would like to meet with you. So maybe this evening I can meet with you, Megan, and then we'll take a break from the class and come with me. We'll go up to the office. And then we'll bring you back.
I hope you can see this. What I've written on the blackboard is something that Father John was talking about. The reason for the fifth commandment, the deep reason. Like we all know, if everybody was just going around killing everybody, we'd live in a worse barrel of barracudas than we live in already. It's reverence for the gift of the person. Each person created by God, in whatever state he or she is in, is unique, is special, is unrepeatable, is a gift, is a real gift, a gift given by God. And the ultimate is to destroy that gift through murder. And that's why from Mount Sinai itself, okay, this commandment was given by God. Thou shalt not kill. Now, what does that mean? Okay, does that mean if somebody is coming at me foaming at the mouth with a meat cleaver, okay, aimed for my neck, that I can't, shoot him? No, it doesn't mean that, okay? Because he's an unjust aggressor. He's trying to take my life, and the means I have to take to defend my life is lethal, okay? But it's what I have to do because he has no right to take my life. I'm an innocent person in relation to him, okay? So this is the key. The key is whether it's an unjust taking of a life that should not be taken. This handout that Rudy has put together very, very much follows the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It's almost the structure, the topics are exactly in line with that. And each of you have the Catechism. So if you want to read, Rudy's made a wonderful summary here of it, but if you want to read in more detail, and the references, read it in the Catechism of the Catholic Church itself in the area that covers the fifth commandment. And it's also in your red book. It's covered in a little more detail too. But the key on page 1 is, quoting the Catechism, that CCC is point 2258 of the Catechism. No one under any circumstance can claim for himself the right to directly destroy an innocent human being. And again, there was an old movie that I think won some Academy Awards, High Noon, okay? The sheriff, a good guy, Gary Cooper, it was his testimony that sent up the desperados to the state penitentiary. Well, they're going to come out and get revenge now on the marshal. And, they're up to no good, and there's 3 of them, and they're loaded with guns. He's trying to find enough people who've got the guts to defend not just him, but the public order against unjust aggressors. And it turns out, well, anyway, it's a great movie. I recommend it. But again, on page 1, it's all about this reverence for persons. People are not things, object of manipulation and control or design. Each person is this gift. And that's why there is the fifth commandment, to have that under all circumstances, as a guiding post in our life. And as Father John pointed out, I think so well, it starts not just with trying to be pharisaical about it. Say, well, how many people have said this? I didn't kill anybody. Okay. All right. You may not have killed anybody, but if what's in your heart is ready to kill anybody and everybody, you're kind of a walking murderer waiting to happen. I remember this was said a little bit facetiously about some crotchety old man. Unfortunately, like a lot of things that had some element of truth about it, he stood Will Rogers on his head. Will Rogers made that famous and wonderful statement, "I never met a man I didn't like." Okay. Well, this guy never met a man he didn't hate. Okay. And to live a life like that is to basically live a life that's hostile to God, to yourself even, and to others. So legitimate self-defense is, we'll kind of go through Rudy's outlined here on page 2. That's why I wanted to make sure everybody had a copy. Didn't you get one? Here's one for, sure, please. Oh, Alex, here, have one for Mary too. Oh, good. Joaquin? There you go. You got it. Here you go. There's a couple of them. All right. There's a beautiful point on the bottom of page 1. We're going to just kind of go through this. We cannot pursue our end of happiness without liberty. Therefore, slavery is a great evil. When you deprive people of the right to determine their own livelihood, their own lives and destiny, how can they pursue happiness? They're completely bound to somebody else. But we can neither have liberty nor pursue happiness without having life. So therefore, murder is an even greater evil than that, because then he's gone. I mean, there's no chance for doing anything at all. We talked a little bit about self-defense, and here on page 2, and I think it's very worthwhile going through this, the way to live the virtues, the opposite of, the man who never met a person he didn't hate, is to try to focus on the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And they're set forth there on pages 2 and 3. Yes, Serena.
Well, I'm listening to you read over from page 1 that we cannot pursue our end of happiness without liberty. And I know we're going to touch on it someplace else, but addictions to things, enslavement, whether it's drugs or alcohol or pornography, whatever it may be, you are no longer free. You no longer have the ability to pursue happiness because you have become enslaved to something that, if you ever listen to Bishop Barron's talks, this is one of the points that he really brings out quite frequently, is that we can enslave ourselves by not choosing wisely, and that we can no longer really be happy or pursue happiness if we're enslaved in that way.
Right.
Dan, what did Saint Jose Maria mean? The founder of Opus Dei, for those of you who don't know who he was. He said something rather extraordinary. He's not the only saint to have said it. He said, "I have no enemy." What did he mean by that?
He meant that we would say he's being, he's expressing an attitudinal goal of his. He had enemies, okay? He had people that thought his idea of trying to encourage ordinary people to seek the heights of sanctity, to seek sainthood, was ridiculous. You should be telling them to be priests, nuns, and monks, okay? And there were people that hated him for saying that any job, any vocation can be made into a way of true sanctity, canonizable sanctity. And, people actually, there were some people that said that he was heretical because he was denying the power of the apostolic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But he said, hey, you know what? They're good people. I'm getting persecuted by good people. They're wrong. I think they're wrong. This is just something, and maybe they'll make me into a better priest. Now that's, that takes a lot of heroism inside to be able to say that, but that is the goal. And it's like what Father John was talking about and what this is talking about. Even for the people that were attacking him, he had a certain reverence for who they were made to be by God. And that's, sometimes you see this and, amazing. There's, there was horrible, horrible genocide that happened, and people have forgotten about it now, in South Central Africa and Rwanda. They made, a wonderful movie about it, Hotel Rwanda. I mean, it was like the devil, got involved. I mean, people who were neighbors, 2 years before, getting along fine, now hated each other because they were of different tribes, and really hundreds of thousands of people in the last century, modern times, were killed Yet, there have been people who exercised heroic forgiveness after the whole thing, after the devils were kind of driven out of Rwanda. There's some really good books it's amazing. With Emmanuel Ilibigaza, wrote this book about how her brothers and parents were killed. She survived, literally hiding in a bathroom, that some member of the other tribe let her hide it. It was a minister. And, but later she met the people that killed her brother and she forgave them. I mean, this is, I think we all can say, I don't know that I could do that. Okay. But she was able to do it. And this is, I think, a point where Rudy also makes a wonderful comment on page 4, number 8 there, right above prohibitions. It is not in our power not to feel or to forget an offense, but the heart that offers itself to the Holy Spirit turns injury into compassion and purifies the memory and transforming the hurt into intercession. There's some of these stories. I mean, they're true stories. They're amazing, but they happen. Exercising heroic forgiveness. There was a young 12-year-old girl named Maria Goretti that lived in a poor area of Italy at the time, or just before World War I. And the family that she lived with had a 16 or 17-year-old son that was up to no good. Basically, he tried to rape her. She said, no, it's a sin. And he stabbed her, with a stiletto, some countless number of times, over 17 times. And she ultimately died of the wounds. But she forgave him while she was dying. And ultimately, even though the guy, was thrown in jail, he didn't get the death penalty at the time in Italy because he was a minor, just made it, 17. Very bitter for the first 10 years of his jailhood. But he had a vision of Maria one night, in a dream, where she was in a beautiful field and offering him flowers. And he turned around, became a devout Catholic, lived to see her beatification and canonization, lived to go to her mother and ask for her forgiveness, which he received. Now, I mean, this is amazing, but it's what's impossible for us with our own limited human resources is not impossible when we have the grace of God in it.
And I'd like to tell a real story. There was a restaurant that used to be open here called the Riverside Deli Cafe. And I knew the people, the owners, and this lady was an extraordinary woman. And her son got involved with gang activity. She tried to warn him to associate with the right people. He didn't, and he was killed. And when the wake occurred, it was unbelievable how packed the wake was. Everyone came. And she sensed she knew who the killer was. And he was at the wake. And she got up and talked and gave testimony about her son's life. But one thing she made very clear at the wake was she forgave the person who killed her son. I can't tell you how moved I was. Here a mother aggrieved at the death of her son, and yet she had it in her heart to forgive the person, a gang banger, whatever, who killed her son. I never forgot that. And It's just one of many stories. And we have Christ's own testimony. What did Christ say from the cross about all of us as sinners? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So the best example is the example of Jesus Christ.
Okay, thank you, Rudy. To get into with the fifth commandment itself, okay, what does it forbid? And it's covered on page 4 here. Number 2, it forbids the direct and intentional killing as gravely sinful. The murderer and those who cooperate voluntarily in murder commit a sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance. First book of the Bible, Genesis. God says, Abel's sin cries out from the ground to me for Abel's blood cries out from the ground to me for vengeance. There are a number of sins that are mentioned in the Bible that cry out to heaven for vengeance. Murder is one. Corruption of the innocent is another one. And get a load of this. Another thing that cries out to heaven for vengeance is withholding wages from your workers, from your laborers. That cries out to heaven for vengeance. Because if they work for you and you don't pay them, that's a very evil thing. The fifth commandment, point 3, also forbids doing anything with the intention of indirectly bringing out somebody's death. So if I leave out pills that I know my nearsighted mother-in-law is going to confuse with her own. I'm not exactly killing her. I didn't do it. Oh, it just happened. Maybe Columbo will figure out that I did it. Okay, but I might be able to get away with it. Okay, that indirect cooperation with it is also a serious sin against the fifth commandment. Exposing someone to mortal danger without grave reason, as well as refusing assistance to someone who is in grave danger. Not my problem. Wait, at least, do something. Okay, call the cops. Try to help. Don't let an innocent person be killed. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. I think all of us can see that pretty easily. But then we come down to harder cases that are harder to see, like, for example, abortion. Abortion is a sin against the fifth commandment. It is a killing of an innocent person, someone who did no wrong to anyone. And this is something that is been part of the teaching of the church for as far back as we have records of the teaching of the church, like the 75 AD or something called the Didache. The Didache is a Greek word. Didache means teaching in Greek. It's called in the Didache of the apostles, the teaching of the apostles. And one of the things in there, and also later on in one of the letters written by a Christian apologist, a Christian philosopher, not a priest, St. Justin the Martyr, in the letter to Diognetus, said, no, we don't do abortions. Okay, that is forbidden to us. So cooperation with abortion is indeed a sin that needs to be repented of, and it's the idea that people are in very, very dangerous and heartbreaking situations often. I really doubt that anybody wants to have an abortion, but they often feel they have to because it's the only way out. In fact, I was involved one time before abortion was legalized, when I was working one summer at a factory. A guy came up to me and he knew I was in law school. He wanted advice as to how he could find a place to have an abortion because his girlfriend was in trouble because of him. And could they, if I, knowing legal connections, could I help him do it? And I told him, look, I'm not going to help you do that, but I will help you find a way to take care of that child, either yourself or, through other people who would love to have this child. I said, do you love the girl that you, who's carrying this baby right now, this fetus? He said, well, sure. He said, well, if you love her, don't you want to see what kind of a person came out of your love? Don't you want to make sure that love that you have is taken care of and brought up in a way where he or she can be happy? And unfortunately, I wasn't able to convince him, but he said, are you married? And I said, no. He said, someday I think you'll be a good father, he told me. But, but there it is. We're all supposed to have, as Christians, this kind of heart to know that when someone is in trouble, we ought to be there to help them. I know a lot of people who are involved in what are called birthright, okay, which is, and also in the nurturing network, which are groups nationwide where you can, and I've had occasion to contact them from time to time for people I've come in contact with. Wherever you are in any of the 50 states, they can get you in touch with people who can help you financially and personally, and making sure that baby is not terminated. There was a friend of mine who was, he had a kind of, I think I mentioned to him before, wonderful guy. I think he might have been the handsomest guy in my class at law school that year. Again, one thing that really impressed me with the guy, this is what impressed me. He had the best head of hair you ever saw in your life. And I can really envy that. I mean, where a normal person has 5 strands of hair, he had about 100. Okay. Beautiful, thick head of hair, and very popular. He was the biggest playboy at our law school. Okay, but he straightened out. Okay, he changed. Okay, he ended up returning to the faith of his parents. His parents were very good people, Mexican Americans, and they were. He ended up, becoming absolutely, wonderful Catholic. And a couple years after we graduated from law school, he called me up for some advice because he had a nephew who was living here in Chicago he and his girlfriend were the nephew and the girlfriend were in trouble the same way that the friend that I talked to were in trouble. Unfortunately, this guy had better luck than I did. They didn't know what to do, and the family said, well, talk to your cousin, the lawyer. He must know. He's a big shot lawyer. He studied on the East Coast. He must know what to do. And my friend told him, hey, look, what you've got here is an opportunity, okay? People would love to have children, just can't. Whether you realize it or not, you've been given a gift. And as a man, okay, it's your job to protect that gift and protect that woman that loves you. So stand up and man up and have the child and do your best, whether you marry her or not, to make sure that child is taken care of. Well, the child was born, okay? And I couldn't have been prouder of this guy. A life is living on this earth, probably here in Chicago somewhere, because this guy said and did the right thing when the time was. People in the pro-life movement tell me statistically that many people regret very much their abortions. They said if one person had told me have the baby, I would have done it, but not one did. Yes, Serena.
I was just going to say, I have 2 cousins who are adopted, and I just think of them as my cousins. We were in a conversation one day, and we were talking about family characteristics or something, And she looked at me and she said, well, you know, Joanna, I am adopted. And I was like, well, yeah, I know that, but to me, she was just my cousin. And I had a cousin who, out of wedlock child, teenager, maybe 18, 19, and put the child up for adoption. 20 years later, they were able to meet and connect. And here was this beautiful young man that grew up in a wonderful, loving family, was one of 5 children, and, you know, she gave him life, you know? And I think part of it was Ellen was saying, my birth mother gave me life. How can I not return that gift, you know? And I'm sure many of us know people who were adopted, maybe even within our own families, and that this is a beautiful gift that, you know, a person who may not be able to take care of a child at that point in their life, but can give that child to a loving family.
Infertility is a very, very serious problem now, much more so than in years gone by. And the waiting list for adoption is gigantic. Every baby, virtually every baby that will be born will find a home today. And there's a lot of places in and without the church which will help people find them. Okay, another area, yes.
Abortionists, as you know, Dan, do not like the word abortion. It's too negative, it's too dirty. They don't talk about abortion. They talk about a woman's right to choose. Now, what is that phraseology missing? A woman's right to choose. Could you address that?
What you're choosing.
Yes. In other words, a woman, we all have a right to choose. That's called freedom. But we are involved with 2 lives. You see, this is where they're missing the both. There is another life within that mother. That's a separate life. And she's got to revere that life. She can't choose to destroy it. That's not a right. That's a travesty, you know, if she destroys it. And this is why, you know, sure we have rights, but that is not a right.
It's actually protecting someone's right by not having an abortion.
Right.
This name here, Bernard Nathanson, he's dead now. Okay. He was one of the founders of the National Abortion Rights Action League. And he was there, he was a gynecologist and an obstetrician, very well educated too. Completely secular background, maybe a little bit of ethnically he was Jewish, but yet, you know, he was Jewish the way Al Capone was a Catholic. Okay, you know, it wasn't important to him. I mean, he was Jewish only by you know, he didn't go to temple or anything. He didn't believe in God. He was a total atheist, and that was that. In fact, he hated religion. He thought, you know, religious people were just guilt trippers. And what he wanted to do was to get abortion legalized. He they formed long before Roe v. Wade, an association to make sure that it would be, because it had been, you know, illegal in every state of the union. And what he did was he said, the way that we're going to do this is turn it into a Catholic issue. Most people are, you know, since, you know, 75% of the country is not Catholic, they're a convenient minority to hang this on, because everybody knows what Catholics think about the morality of abortion. We can blame this on the Catholics and make it look like it's freedom from Catholics to get rid of abortion, to legalize abortion, to make support for abortion. So they, you know, succeeded. Okay, and using the prejudice card, okay, as a way to increase popular opinion in favor of abortion. But Nathanson, by his own estimation, killed, I forget, some incredible number, 10,000 abortions, including some of his own children. He was not faithful to his marriage commitments. He had other girls that were in trouble, and he took care of the problem. And it was amazing. He had no respect for religion whatsoever. He thought it was all just nutty stuff. But there was a tremendous guilt that he felt. And he ran into, somewhere along the line, okay, I think in correspondence, okay, in op-eds, he presented a pro-abortion piece, and sometimes a Catholic priest, and a priest actually that I know, was a friend of mine, presented an opinion piece countering his. The priest, my friend, got in contact with Nathanson, and over the years, they would trade opinions and stuff on it. Ultimately, Nathanson converted to Catholicism and became a pro-life physician.
One of the things that really convinced him was when ultrasound came into existence, and he had a colleague film an abortion with ultrasound. And that was the genesis of that film, that famous film, The Silent Scream. And when he saw that, he decided, well, I'll only do certain types of abortions under certain types of conditions. And then eventually he couldn't perform abortions anymore. And he started hanging out in pro-life circles. Here's this man who's an atheist hanging out in pro-life circles, which are predominantly religious people. Well, if you hang out with a bunch of religious people, what do they tend to do? They tend to pray for you. And this man, think about it. I mean, he aborted his own child. In the book that he wrote, the most chilling chapter I have ever read was his description of that abortion. And he admits it. He says, this is the heart of an abortionist. Cold, clinical, frozen. It was just horrible. And through the grace of baptism, think about that. Through the grace of baptism, that's washed away.
He said, finally in his life, he felt free. He was free of the guilt, of the shame that he denied, okay, but nevertheless was there, of the killings that he'd done of tens of thousands of people. Another similar story, let me just do this, and then we'll unplanned by Abby Johnson. Abby Johnson was the director of the largest abortion clinic in Texas, and she also had 2 abortions. Anyway, this movie is very powerful. It's hard to take, okay, because she goes through her life and what happened, and she is now pro-life and a Roman Catholic, okay. And so did Di, both Doe of Doe v. Wade, Norma McCovey, and Roe of Roe versus, they both ended up rejecting, their previous pro-abortion positions, and they both ended up dying as Catholics. Yes, Mary.
That was going to be my question. Wasn't the Roe v. Wade girl kind of, and she became pro-life, but wasn't she kind of coerced into?
She never even wanted an abortion, but they used her. The abortion movement leaders used her.
Okay, I don't want to, okay, everybody knows what the church's position.
But one last final thing is that there are so many groups out there, so many organizations out there to help women, to, financially, to help them with material things, to help them with friendships, that, it's just so sad that this is still happening. Because there are ways that we can help them. We have a wonderful pro-life group here at
We do.
the Angels. And, we just really need to pray for people who've had abortions. There's wonderful organizations to help. We need to pray for people who are thinking about it too.
I just say one more thing. One thing that kind of sticks out to me, my mom leads the pro-life group. I've been around this my whole life. But Planned Parenthood was started and because of Alex, and he's very like this too, that to get rid of the Black population.
Oh.
It's known that and a lot of Planned Parenthoods are in poor areas and everything. So it's
Do you know where
It's
Planned
very
Parenthood is in
obvious.
Milwaukee?
what
Do you know where Planned Parenthood is located in Milwaukee?
probably the worst part of
No,
Milwaukee.
between the African American community and the college campus.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were, she was a eugenicist.
Yeah, Margaret Sanger,
Margaret
that was her name.
And she frankly, she didn't like Eastern Europeans and didn't like Catholics either. You know?
And Hitler loved her. I mean, he translated all her works into German and passed them around in Germany. He liked
She
it.
wanted to wipe out the Black population.
And abortions are the largest single group of babies that are aborted are 35% of the Black community, Blacks who are expecting. They have the most abortions.
And 35% of all abortions in this country are African
I
American.
think in
Yes.
New York, like last year I read, more Black babies were aborted than born.
And that's gonna go.
Well, that's a
on
horrible
over a decade.
statistic.
But we need to pray for these people. Many of these women, as Dan said, feel like they have their backs
Yeah,
up
they don't
against the
have, they
wall.
feel like they don't have.
They feel like they have no choice.
See,
And we need to tell them that they do, that they're loved.
and the beautiful, even more beautiful than that, and as beautiful as that is that no matter what someone has done, no matter how many abortions they've had, Nathanson had, performed tens of thousands of abortions, including two of his own kids. Avery Johnson had too. God can rebuild with that. God can forgive that and restore in some way a person's love and integrity and heart. And once again, I fortunately have seen the kind of transformation that can happen in people. The joy returns to a much deeper level. The restoration, the resurrection that Christianity is all about can always take place. There is once, actually, the time when I had some business in Africa, a man asked me in good faith, "Is there any sin that just is too grave for God to forgive?" He tended to think there were, but I told him, good, Catholic doctrine is, it's no. No matter what your sin is, God can forgive it. God can restore you if you are sorry for it. If you turn to him, he can fill up whatever hole is in your heart and fill it full of love and do a lot of good with it. I often thought that this has nothing to do with exactly what we're talking about, other than what I'm saying right now, that if Judas, had repented, if Judas had not just gone and killed himself, he would have been the most powerful witness to Christ there could have possibly been. He could have said, look, I know he's God. I turned him in. He died because of me, and I saw him alive. I put my hands into the holes in his wrists, I have this theory that I think if Judas had repented, he would have had the job of St. Paul. I think he would have been the apostle to the Gentiles instead of St. Paul. But God always has a plan B. Judas despaired and killed himself. And St. Paul, another persecutor of the church, got the job of opening up Christianity to the rest of the world. It takes us to the next hard part of the fifth commandment, euthanasia. And I think we can all have a little sympathy with this. I mean, who likes to see somebody suffer? Nobody, especially when it's somebody that we love. But as suicide, whether it's Judas or us, eliminating someone who has a problem is not ours to do. Okay, this is part of an innocent life that shouldn't be killed. Now, the church, to allow euthanasia, pretty much, and it's happened this way in the Netherlands and Sweden and other places, puts tremendous pressure on old people to end their own lives if they have any problems, whatsoever at all. Why burden your family? Instead of respect for reverence for the gift that those people are, helping them in their time of need, if we allow the easy way out, or to just eliminate them, everything, all that's just sort of wiped away. I had to face this a little bit in my own family one time. Okay, my dad was devastated when my mom died. She was the love of his life. He just, when she died, he started talking about suicide. And he was telling me all these stories. Well, the Indians had suicide and they, didn't think anything of it. He was a big admirer of the Native Americans. We were, I think it was basically because of us kids that he knew we didn't like. He goes, I want to see my wife again. And I said, if you do that, you're never going to see her again. Okay, you'll be in different places, believe me. And he didn't commit suicide. And indeed, it turned out he had 10 of the best years of his life. But my mother was a very dynamic, engaging person. And so when we would come home for visits, the kids, things would pretty much surround my mother. My dad was there, but he was not the center of attention the way my mother was. Well, my dad, all of a sudden now was the center of attention for the next 10 years. And he kind of really started to enjoy it. He started writing books. He wrote 3 books, actually received a commendation from the Marine Corps for one of the books that he wrote. He ended up becoming those 10 years, he thought were going to be horrible, and they were horrible in the sense that he wasn't there with his wife, but turned out to be some of the 10 best years of his life. And the affection and the care that my sister in particular, who lived close to him, and her husband showed my dad, was something that brought them out too. Instead of eliminating the problem so I can go on with my things, we make the problems of someone else something that we have compassion and care for. We create a different kind of society. We create a transformation that mirrors the transformation that's supposed to be in our souls as we become Christian. Now, because the church is opposed to killing life, people think wrongly that the church will prolong someone's life forever. That's not true, okay? The church will not, the church believes in thou shalt not kill, but the church does not believe in necessarily prolonging the dying process, when all you're doing is stretching out the dying process by having extraordinary care given. The church recognizes that there is no compelling need to give extraordinary care, that all it's going to do is literally increase the dying process rather than helping and curing the patient. Curing the patient, yes. Just dragging on the death from 1 hour to a year is not necessarily the way to go. Now, that does not mean we can withhold ordinary care, food and hydration. They have to be given that. Ordinary medicine to prevent pain. Palliative care is good. Okay, it's in the catechism, but not just eliminating someone's life. God is calling them and us to something. We can't necessarily know what it is, but it's something that is transformative. Suffering can make you or break you. So a lot of times it makes you. I remember a friend of mine had a mom who had serious Alzheimer's and was suffering quite a bit. And, these issues started coming up. And I mentioned to him, why don't you take a trip to Lourdes? You know, he wanted to take on a last trip to Italy. I said, hey, you know, you're going to Italy, you're flying right over France. You know, why don't you take a little trip to Lourdes, see what happens? And Lourdes, of course, as you know, is the famous place where Our Lady appeared to Saint Bernadette in 1858 and left a spring, a miraculous spring with which many cures are associated, even to this day. And he and his wife and his mom, you know, went to Lourdes. And after he came back, he told me, you know, Dan, when I was there, I was praying for a miracle. I was hoping for a miracle. But, you know, my mom was not cured, okay? But my mom is different now. And I'm different now. And my wife is different now. So we didn't get the miracle we were hoping for, but we got another miracle, kind of a more subtle miracle. And it's a miracle I'm very grateful for. And before his trip to Lourdes, he was a good guy, but his attitude was more materialistic. But afterwards, was more human, more loving. I think Our Lady rubs off on people in Lourdes. And so I think this is what the church's teaching is on that. Rudy, do you have something you wanted to say? No? Okay.
Just the word palliative care. Do you realize what that word is? It's a sophisticated word. It means taking pains, to using painkillers, alleviating the suffering of dying people. Now, we are allowed, if they are suffering greatly, to give them this medicine, even if it risks shortening the lives of the patients. What's sad is very often the people who need it the most are the very poor who can't afford this medication, which could help the relief. And that's it. That's got to be made more equitable, so everyone can have use of this medicine. That's all I wanted to say.
The kind of standard thing that our society tells us to say is, well, it's my life, I can do with what I want.
Yeah.
As people who believe in God, that's not true. It's simply not true. Our life was a gift from God. We are the person that's the gift. And trying to judge this just from our own perspective is to judge a case with inadequate data. There's an interesting book written by the English author Graham Greene during his Catholic phase called The Heart of the Matter. Thank you. The book is about a British diplomat assigned to one of the British colonies in the 1950s in Africa. And he's a good guy, you know, he's pretty good, he's an honest guy, but he gets involved again in a clandestine, you know, illicit affair. And it's the whole house of cards starts falling down on him. He's getting pressure from all sides, getting blackmailed. He keeps digging himself deeper into trouble, and he finally decides the only way out. His wife doesn't know yet. The only way out is suicide. Okay, and so he ultimately does the suicide. But and the book does a very good job of showing that the suicide was completely wrong-headed. His wife already did know about it. She was coming back to the colony there so that she could be there and reconcile with her husband. It would not have necessarily been the disaster that he was involved with. His life could have been a lot different and a lot better rather than ending it in the middle, you know, when it was supposed to end at the end. And so these things, you know, life is this gift that comes from God, given to us as a stewardship. And when it comes to the difficult time at the end, God grant us the grace during the hour that we have, or so to speak, a colloquial hour, maybe weeks, months, whatever it might be, for whatever purpose that he has. If we believe in God, we be a corollary to that is we believe that his fatherhood extends even to that as well. He has a purpose. He writes straight with crooked lines. We don't know what it is, but if we stay with him, somehow, as St. Paul promises us, for those who love God, all things will work unto good. Despite the fact that we don't sugarcoat in Catholicism the tragedy that's involved with these things. Hey, we have the crucifix with all the wounds of the blood right there, on every altar. Yes, there will be suffering that is in life, but that suffering somehow can be made to advance the glory of God, to increase the love that's in the world, to draw that love out with others, and to be the focus of something that becomes greater than the sum of its parts. That's part of God. Now, other things are sins against the fifth commandment. And I think Rudy and the Catholic Catechism does a nice job of bringing these out. And they begin on page 8. Anger, cultivating anger is not just bad anger management. It's actually offensive to the fifth commandment because as Father John pointed out, that's the wellspring of the evil. The evil comes from inside us, and if you get enough steam in that evil, it starts exploding. Okay, and we want to nip that in the bud by trying to attack, not be dominated by anger. Father John did a nice job of talking about that. I'm not going to say any more. Scandal is a sin against the fifth commandment. What is scandal? One way or another, leading others to sin, and there's various ways you can do it. By helping others, facilitating others, encouraging them to do wrong. Having telling a guy he can make a lot of money by selling heroin or crack or something out in the street. The guy that led the other person into that is guilty of a sin against the fifth commandment, and doing things that destroy someone's goodwill is a sin not only against the eighth commandment, but also against the fifth commandment. If my behavior is such, if you think I'm a good guy, and all of a sudden I do something outrageous that shows I'm just a fraud, and that shakes you up, it causes you to start doubting God, that's a serious sin against the fifth commandment. That's a scandal. And we all know, what some of these clerics did, is rightly called a scandal, because if you can't trust your father, who can you trust? And these guys created, even though what they were doing was totally against the teaching of the church, nevertheless, they caused a lot of people to stumble. If Father Joe is manhandling little kids, well, here this whole thing this outfit that he joins must be as rotten can be, and I don't want any part of it. Well, the fact that they left the church is less, it's somewhat their fault, but it's more the fault of the guy that caused them to do it. The sin is great on his part.
Dan, excuse me, could we just a minute go back to anger? There is something that we did not address, which I think is very important. There is such a thing as righteous anger. Anger is an emotion. It's also a moral evil, but it is an emotion. Emotions are neither good or bad. Depends on how you use them. Our Lord threw the money changers out of the temple, and he said to them, "You made my Father's house a den of thieves instead of a house of prayer." Now, what our Lord did was react to injustice. Our Lord never, when he made a whip of cords and turned over their tables, it looked like he was out of control. He never lost control. And we can be and should be angry at all the injustices that are going on today. But that doesn't mean, how does that anger, certainly voting for people who can address, be they members of the court system, our political system, speaking out, we have the right of free speech. Those are ways of addressing righteous anger. Parents, when they correct their children, use righteous anger also, as long as it doesn't get out of control. Is teachers also. That's a fine line to walk, because there are times, and I must say, there were times my anger was out of control.
And you're not even Italian. You can imagine where I fall on there. Yeah, mine was been out of control many times.
That's why we go to confession.
Right.
When we cross that line. But anger can be a benefit. Just so that you know, read the biography of Lincoln. Lincoln was considered this wonderful gentleman, but there were times when Lincoln would get very angry. All right, and that was just anger. So just so that you're aware of that, okay?
Good. Okay, other sins against the fifth commandment. Let's take a look at page 9. Racism and prejudice are not only sins against justice, they're also sins against the fifth commandment. Okay, the church has always taught that throughout its history, that no matter what country or what continent or what color or nationality you are, you're meant to be a child of God, and that's the thing that matters. And anything that is based on just racial or prejudicial criteria is wrong, and it creates hatred and all these other things. Other things, hurting yourself is a sin against the fifth commandment. It's not, it's my body, I can do whatever I want. Well, you shouldn't get yourself so doped up that you're not going to be of good to anybody, or drunk up that you're not going to be of good to anybody else. To throw your life away is not only foolish, it's actually in violation of the fifth commandment. Then more, there's interesting things here that Rudy's got at page 9 and 10 on experimentation and research. Okay, can you experiment on human beings carefully, with consent, but not in a way that destroys the reverence you should have for that person? I'm sure they had all sorts of fiendish experiments in those concentration camps in Germany. I mean, it's almost like out of a horror movie, some of the stuff that they did. Now, I'm sure they got some good evidence out of that, okay? But it was wrong, because these are human beings that you're destroying by doing these experiments on them. And that's, again, it can never be where the dignity of that individual person is violated. Capital punishment. What about capital punishment? We say, hey, thou shalt not kill. Well, what about, the guy that gets the chair? Okay. What about that? The church has a negative view of the utility of capital punishment in today's world. I think it's Rudy sets out the point of the catechism here very well on bottom of page 10b1. The state may inflict capital punishment if this is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against an unjust aggressor. So the criteria for that in most developed nations is, it's just usually not the case. And of course, the real horror story of this is, God forbid, if someone who didn't do it gets the chair, there's no way to fix that, okay, on this earth, okay? And so to avoid that horrible circumstance, which has happened, okay, is something that one of the reasons why the church has a very negative view of capital punishment, but not an absolute view. Okay. Like, for example, one of the, I don't want to take too much time, but one of the cases that was brought up in the Supreme Court decision, that actually allowed the states to reinstitute capital punishment was the situation of the Aryan Brotherhood. Okay. The Aryan Brotherhood was a real ghoulish thing that existed in maximum security prisons where people had life imprisonment. You had to only be white to be in it, and you had to kill a person while you were in prison. Okay, and since they already had the maximum penalty, there was no stopping these guys. So this actually carried quite a bit of weight with the justices of the time. The only way to eliminate this problem is to eliminate these guys. And so that might have been something that could justify capital punishment, even though you hope that people change. And there are great stories. In fact, there's a guy whose beatification is up. The guy named Jacques Fesch, who murdered somebody in France, but during the time that he was on death row, turned himself around and actually, became, quite a devout person, and, went there. The means of capital punishment in France then, and if they still have it now, was the guillotine. He went to the guillotine, full of love and compassion, asking forgiveness for all the trouble, and he said that he deserved what he got. So, I mean, it's, anyway. Yes, theoretically, there can be cases where this is possible. Treason in wartime is probably another one. But we don't like it. We don't want it. We try to avoid it if at all possible. What about war itself? Okay, thou shalt not kill. And here's what is war? But killing all over the place. Well, going all the way back to the time of the fathers of the church distinguished between just and unjust wars. It is certainly, just as it's good and legitimate for Marshal Gary Cooper and his friends to defend themselves against the desperados that are invading his town, well, so it is good and legitimate to stop the Nazis from trying to get their concentration camps over the whole world, okay, to defend ourselves against that. And if the only way that they're going to be stopped is through fighting back and shooting back, well, that's what we have to do. But Rudy does a very good job, and so does the Catechism of the Catholic Church, on the bottom of page 11, stating what the criteria are for a just war. This is quite interesting. These were actually developed by St. Augustine, okay, back in the early 400s, and further developed by St. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. It's got to be declared by a proper authority. You can't just go to war on your own. Say, I'm mad at Canada. I want to get, that little strip of land near Detroit, part of the United States. No, you can't do it. Even though you might have a better yard if you do it. No, it's got to be the public authority doing it for a just cause. It can't be just because you want more land, okay? It's got to be clear that all means of peaceful resolution have tried and failed. So you got to try to avoid war first. So you got to see if you can negotiate this thing, if it can work, if you listen to reason. There has to be what's called a principle of proportionality. That's the last point, F. The evils of the conflict must not outweigh the good results to be expected in waging war. There has to be, before that, a reasonable prospect for success. Like I always bring up, I have a lot of friends who are Lithuanians, and their country was occupied by the Soviet Union for over 40 years. And would they have been just, was it just for the Soviet Union to gobble up their country? No, it was not. Okay, they just moved in and took it over. Okay, would they have been justified in getting rid of the Soviets? Yes. Okay, but if they didn't have a chance, if it's going to be, 500 guys from the Lithuanian neighborhood in Chicago fighting against 5 million Russians with tanks, you're better off not doing, even though they don't belong there, they shouldn't be there, but all you're going to do is kill 500 good guys. Okay, you have to have a reasonable possibility for success, and that it's the good that you accomplish, can't outweigh the bad that war will bring. And so ultimately, in 1990, the Lithuanians did drive out the Russians. Okay, but probably in 1985, it wouldn't have been a good idea, even though the Russians certainly didn't belong there, because all you would have been done is helping the Russians kill more Lithuanians. Okay, so but anyway, that's and again, it's quite realistic. It's quite interesting. It's highly developed, and also too in war, it's not part of the Catholic social ethic to kill non-combatant populations. You may get better results. They may want to surrender if you go through the town. In fact, that was the Mongol policy. If the city didn't surrender, they'd kill every man, woman, and child in the town. So the next town over knew what happened to them if they didn't surrender. Okay, it had results. Okay, was it right? No, it was not. Okay, that would be considered a war crime now. Okay, thanks to 20 centuries of Christendom, but it wasn't considered a wartime anything wrong then. It was just might makes right. Okay, but we don't believe that might makes right. It should be might for right. Okay, and so killing non-combatants and poisoning wells and stuff like that, waging war against people who aren't an immediate threat to you, who aren't coming at you with a gun or a machine gun or whatever, is not allowed. Okay, under the Catholic morality. So that's it.
In a positive way, remember too, we all sitting in this room have a tremendous responsibility. War is not just an international or a national thing. Yes, we have to defend our country. We put a lot of money into defense. But what can we do? We can pray. Prayer is the most powerful thing. Years ago, in 1990, it would never have been dreamt that the Soviet Union would have fallen. But because of the prayer of millions of people, this occurred. And the Soviet Union was a real threat to the peace of the world. They had an aggressive policy. And Mary, in a number of her appearances, especially at Fatima, advocated to pray the rosary. The rosary is perhaps one of the most powerful tools we have as Catholics to overcome the dangers of war. And they exist today. We have the technology of atomic energy, and it's in the hands of some pretty bad people. So this is serious. And we in conscience, have to pray for peace. How often? Every single day. Please pray for peace.
Good. Okay, there's a lot, a whole lot that we covered today. You think the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, and be open and shut. Yeah, of course, nobody should commit murder. But there's a lot more to it when you look at the root and when you look at the branches. But the key to the whole thing is, once again, going back to the beginning, that this world is not all that there is. This world was put into operation by God for his purposes, and each person that exists was put into life with the consent and the will of God. We have to respect and find and search for what that is and respect that person so that she or he can make the contribution that God really wanted to be made by bringing that person to life in this world. Any questions? Yes, Mary.
I just have something that I feel like I hear a lot from people with the Catholic Church and about suicide is that they think the Catholic Church just goes around and says suicide is bad. People that kill themselves, like that they're horrible, like it's such a mortal sin. And one thing that I think that isn't spoken about enough is that the church doesn't, if you jump off a bridge, we don't know what happens between the person jumping off the
Right.
bridge and then hitting the water. They could have asked for God's forgiveness. If they die, we don't know. So it's still important to pray for that person and to not, we can't judge and say they're definitely in hell. We don't know that. The Bible doesn't even say that Judas is in hell. So it's important to, I think, as a church to not be like, oh, it's obviously a mortal sin and it's wrong, but I think a lot of people think that the Catholic Church just straight, doesn't condemn it, or you know what I'm saying?
No, right. Yes, Serena, I think you want to add something.
Well, it goes back to what we talked about, what makes a sin mortal too, is the knowledge and the free consent. Sometimes people will commit suicide, but then they're mentally or psychologically not really being able to give free consent to that act.
Right, they're so overcome
Yes.
by the condition that they're not in their right mind, and the church recognizes that.
And Mary has a very good point that we can judge actions, but we can't judge the state
Right,
of the person.
right. We really can't. We don't know. We don't have the ability, and so it's wrong to jump to that conclusion. There's, I think, did we cover? There is such a sin called rash judgment. It's a sin. When you sound your mouth off about some individual and you don't really know the story. You're just shooting your mouth off. That's actually a sin, and it's a sin against the 8th commandment. Okay. Daniel, did you have a question or something you wanted to add?
I was gonna add the free will thing as well. I think didn't that change in like the last 70 years?
Yes.
So,
I'd like to address that. That's very important. The church has not changed her teachings on
The morality, right.
the morality of suicide. You play God. We do not have the authority to shorten or take away our own life. That's intact. However, psychology has come to the assistance of the church to better understand the human being. And as Dorena very well put, there are circumstances, psychological, that can affect the freedom, and hence they're not guilty of mortal sin. And years ago, in the Catholic Church, you could not have, if there was suicide, you could not have a Catholic funeral or be buried in a Catholic cemetery. That is not true today. Even if it's a suicide, they can have a Catholic funeral and they can be buried at a Catholic cemetery. But that's a very good point that you made. It's not that the church suddenly liberalized itself. No, the evil of suicide is what it is. But it's just that we understand the human being a little better, and therefore the circumstances surrounding that suicide could have an effect on the gravity of the evil as that person experienced it. And as Dan very rightfully said, we can't judge that, and the church doesn't want to.
See, it's interesting. These certain things are matters of judgment and discipline, okay, in the church before, and that's something that can change. Like before, I mean, it's just much smaller things. Mass was always said facing the altar, the priest facing the altar with his back to the people, face to the tabernacle. Now we most of the time do it the opposite. Okay. Why? Okay. It's just a judgment call. Okay. How do we best get people to realize what the Eucharist means and is? They thought, for about 1,000 years, the best way was to face the presence of Christ in the Eucharist and actually the rising sun, okay, to symbolize the resurrection. But it was a judgment that could be changed, and we turned the altar around. The church wouldn't give people a Christian burial, in fact, or in the cemetery, okay, because they wanted to uphold the horror of suicide and how evil that was. You see, the real bad thing about suicide, where it's done for real, there's no ability for repentance, okay? You can't go to confession after that, he's done, okay? And so to discourage souls being lost forever, the church thought, well, we got to make this clear. We got to underline it. We got to put a red circle around it so that people don't want to do this. Now, okay, probably in an age where there's less stability, and in an age of less stability, more suicides, okay, the idea is, wow, we don't want to, as a pastoral discipline, this is too much to do that, because we got a lot of people who were terribly afflicted with true mental illness, and to deprive them of a Christian burial is just like depriving a cancer victim of a Christian burial. Well, they were overcome by a fatal illness, which was mental instead of physical, and we recognize that. And so it's a difference in discipline as opposed to doctrine. Good, Dan. Anybody else? Yes, Margaret. Good to see you too.
Kind of relative to today, stem cell research. There's
What kind of research?
stem cell.
Oh, stem cell.
And there's the vaccination issue that it uses stem cells from embryos.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the church is saying that's okay. I mean, to get vaccinated, even though it came from the embryo. And, I've got a lot of friends that are saying, do not take it because it has the stem cells on embryos. So I feel like I don't know who to believe on this or what direction to take.
I wish I were more of an expert of this, Durante. Are you? I know that the bishops just within the last week issued a pastoral letter on the various vaccines, evaluating them from a moral standpoint, because there's one in particular, the Astra one, which has more involvement with fetal stem cells than the others.
I think the Pfizer and Moderna were not.
And so they.
That's the most common ones.
Those are the first.
And so I would, if you go to the usccb.com, you can find that letter. There's a one-page summary that can be somewhat useful if you want to get to the bottom line. But if you want to go into the details, it's there. Now, I haven't read it myself, so I don't know. I haven't had the opportunity to evaluate it. But there are certain things that when the cooperation with evil is remote and unavoidable, you can participate in it. Like, say, for example, none of us like everything where our tax dollars go, but should we therefore, as a matter of conscience, some people argue this, because some of it goes to things that I don't particularly agree with, I'm going to not pay my taxes at all. And so now again, if the U.S. Ridiculous. It declares war on Vatican City. Okay, then sure, I'm not going to participate in that war, and whatever. Okay, and I'm not going to support that war in any way. I can't. But when you got something when you have something as big as the United States is involved with so many different things, you'd have to leave the world to avoid some kind of cooperation, to avoid any kind of cooperation with it. It's only like when the cooperation is proximate, nearby, that you need to be concerned about it. If I have, if my stockbroker is has a portfolio, and in that portfolio there is one of the companies gives some money to a bad thing, Planned Parenthood, okay. I think it depends on how much money they're giving, quite frankly. You know, if it's somebody's a major supporter of Planned Parenthood, I'm going to tell them, don't take that one out of the portfolio. Okay. But if it's somebody that just, you know, threw in $50 or $100 or, you know, the equivalent, like they did with everything else, just to keep everybody happy, that's a little bit different. Again, you'd have to withdraw from the whole world, okay, to avoid that kind of thing.
As far as those vaccines go, you know, take a look at it. Last article that I read said that both the Pfizer and Moderna did not come through fetal stem cells or anything like that. So, the article I read came from a rather reliable source too, but it is of concern. And stem cell research, it's kind of an interesting thing. My sister is a neurobiologist who has done stem cells research, and she always does it on adult. And she says, and actually the science has shown that that's the way to go. The embryonic stem cells, they don't know what they want to be when they grow up, and you end up with a lot of problems. And the best stem cells are from the patient themselves, because then you don't have to deal with rejection, like organ rejection and things like that. So stem cells, not all stem cells are equal.
Right. And I had another question, because I like how it was phrased. It's in the abortion area, but it deals with many common forms of artificial birth control cause abortions. What I wanted to point out in that is they use the term artificial birth control and how you contrast that to natural family planning. And because I've had people attack me on the view of
Right.
that's all that natural family planning is birth control. But one is natural and one's artificial. I mean, is that another?
Save that next week, I think, right? It's next week, the 6th and 9th commandment. We can talk about that in more detail next week.
Birth control medications are abortifacients. They cause an abortion.
And they don't prevent conception.
And that does affect the 5th commandment.
Right.
Yeah, in natural family planning, we will get more into that, but that is a different thing where you basically are using the woman's infertile cycle, part of her cycle. So it's a different type of thing. Now, can NFP be misused?
Yes.
Yes, it can. But if you are using it in its proper way, it is not.
Well, and basically, what is NFP? It's not having sex. Okay, there's no law that says you must have sex at every possible time. Okay, it's using your knowledge of the infertile periods to abstain from sex at a particular time for a sufficiently good reason. So,
And that's really the key.
yes, Alec.
Like just 30 seconds, just to piggyback. So from what I've gathered from research, as far as the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, you had a lot of conversations with relative nurses who did not take it. And the best thing I've heard was if you believe that this would benefit you based on what you've looked into yourself, you should do it. But if someone's attacking you, you should definitely just understand they're also frustrated because there is no confirmed rate of how long it lasts or how effective it is. With the rates going around, it's kind of like it's to each his own in a way. And you have the people say, oh, you don't believe the science. They have people say, I do. You know, it's just this balancing scale that's just, you have to do what you feel is right within. But if you feel someone's nudging you and they themselves don't really know the details, you should also just account that.
Look at research from both
Yeah,
sides.
just both
because
sides.
The news tends to push the one side, and there's
Yeah.
tons of research on the other side that isn't
That's
as
censored.
popular.
That's right.
It's very
So-
important also.
as you can see,
Good
a lot of
point.
people didn't make it, and here we have proof, and it's here. Is of the 1% that is affected, while there could be others who have been affected with no symptoms, but unfortunately, there are people who are and who are not. You have to allow that person to get frustrated. That's all I was gonna say. Is that we have to work in it when, I mean, mother, just really quick, I'm sorry, mother figure of mine, Filipina, named Joyce LeBlanc. She passed away. She was actually the first nurse in Illinois to pass away. You know, other comorbidities. You know, I worked personally with her before this, and there was some things going on, but you know, God rest her soul. When it happened to her, it was just like a ton of bricks. And I literally, this is me and her all the time. So how it happened, and I'm still here, amazes me. Whereas it happened to me, he's here. It's amazing. So you know, I know it bothers you, but you gotta, if you believe in that, then that's what you believe
I
in.
guess you often want to have the answer very black and white and clear, but it
Correct.
is the situation.
Yes, I completely get it.
It
Yeah,
comes
so
back
sorry.
to informing your conscience, which we
Yeah.
have talked about in previous classes, that, and in situations like this, that you're right, they're not always real clear cut, you know, that they can be,
And there's a lot of writing on it. You know, you got to do the best you can. But the problem is the best you can is not necessarily what everyone else is doing.
Correct.
You got to dig a little bit,
right, further.
especially when it's politically charged.
Oh,
And I think Alex made a very good point. You need to inform yourself and then to make the best decision that you can make based on the information that you have available. And, you know, it's,
And morally
a lot of
speaking,
misinformation out there too, so.
you know, that's what counts. I mean, God's not going to fault somebody for making the best moral decision they could based on an honest effort to find out the facts. So there you go. Okay, what's next week? Is it the 6th and 9th commandments?
I think so.
Hopefully Father John does a nice job of leading that. That's a real toughie. Yes? Oh, there's some questions there on the,
One question is there an exception when a mother's life is at risk in the pregnancy?
it's a more complicated question than it appears, okay? Because technically speaking, that particular situations, I gotta kill, if you make it into black and white, again, say either I kill this baby or mom dies, so you kill the baby. No, they're both lives sanctified by God. They both need to be protected. Okay, so you can't kill one to save the other. However, okay, and so the law may be framed in that terminology because that, and morality, because when you, for example, you get the case of the ectopic pregnancy, where because of literally a kink in the woman's reproductive system, the baby begins to develop within the fallopian tube rather than in the uterus. So it's growing, it's there. It has no chance of surviving, okay? It's trapped. It's when it bursts out, because it's not going to be in the uterus, it's going to die, okay? And it will also kill the mother if it develops to that point. You can, because in removing the defective fallopian tube, and the child will die in that thing, you can go and morally perform that operation.
It's an unintended consequence. You're not deciding, I'm going to kill the baby. It is that I need to save the mother in that sense.
yes.
It's like cancer treatment. If you're pregnant and your doctor is saying you need chemotherapy, etc., an unintended consequence could be possibly hurting the child. So it's a different thing than actually deciding I am going to end this person's life.
I just want to piggyback on that from a medical standpoint on that topic one. This is where it's very confusing because you can remove the fallopian tube, but you can't give the medication that most people give to directly kill the fetus. You can only, from the church's standpoint, remove the fallopian
Right.
tube.
In which, even though you know the baby's going to die, you know, but you don't really want the baby to die. It's just what you had to do to resolve the disease fallopian tube. So it's called the principle of double effect. Now, in a legal manner, you're having an abortion to save the life of the mother. So that's okay, but it's a little more complicated than that. Interesting story. Prior to around World War I, when a baby was being, head was too big for getting through the vaginal canal, the only way, cesarean section was not developed that well. And cesarean section would make a gigantic risk to the mother that would, in those days, that would generally cause the death of the mother. And so the standard operating procedure before World War I was to do a craniotomy, to crush the baby's head, take out the dead fetus, dead baby, okay, and save the life of the mother. Because that was not allowable from a moral standpoint, from a Catholic standpoint, Catholic physicians developed actually the new and current manner of a new way to perform cesarean sections. And this is very dramatic. One time, at a lecture over years ago, probably the late 60s at Harvard, someone asked for a show of hands as to how many people and how many students in the audience were born through cesarean section. Obviously, a good number of people raised their hand. Now it's become something that even people will do voluntarily for different reasons. And they said, okay, all of you owe your lives to the Catholic Church. Because the Catholic Church, looking for a moral way to protect the woman and the child, developed a cesarean section that protected both, similar to the stem cell thing. And it was the original stem cell research was done on embryonic tissue, but we knew that that was immoral. So again, it was people with, from mostly a Catholic standpoint that wanted to explore the stem cells from the adults, and they work better.
Yeah, they do. People like my sister.
Morality often is difficult, but it's often, good morality is often good life. Okay, it makes things go in a much more positive and beneficial direction in the long run. Okay, anything else? Any other questions there, Pat?
Where do Catholics draw the line between church and state?
Can we hold, okay, I guess that's in connection with abortion. I think that's what he means, because that's a whole nother topic, okay? And, which could take, quite a bit of time to answer and in general, but I'll answer in specific with respect to abortion. Okay. The church can and must declare what the morality is, okay? The church, it's not doing its duty if it doesn't say what's right and what's wrong, because they're not preaching the teaching of Christ if they neglect that. On the other hand, it is the job of the lay person, not the church hierarchy, to determine what laws are best suited to protect the innocent lives. So and I think the church, like for example, in the United States, I think the church sort of made a mistake on that, okay, in the 1980s in our country. The 1980s, there was a real possibility of getting a human life amendment. And there were several different ones being proposed of different nature. There was the Hyde Amendment. There were other ones that were proposed. The church took a position in favor of one. Okay, when I say the church, the American hierarchy. It wasn't the church. The American hierarchy took a position of endorsing one of those. I think they were in error by doing that, because people in the pro-life movement thought they endorsed one that wasn't all that effective. Okay. And that really is which law best protects life is in large part beyond the competence of clerics to decide. Okay. It should be well-informed citizens with moral criteria, using their moral criteria to develop what those laws ought to be. It's interesting in the history of the church, they make these mistakes from time to time. The church's record on faith and morals is amazing. Okay, it turns out, the Catholic Church always ends up with the dust all settles on the right position of morality. It doesn't seem like it at the time. Okay, faith and morals, but it ends up years later being vindicated. Okay. However, on purely political matters, purely political, like whether Louis XII or Philip II ought to be the chief source of power in central Italy, the papacy has made mistakes, and their record on political matters, purely political matters, I'm not talking about religious matters, is not that much better than anybody else's. So I think the church has a right to say that certain things are immoral. Like, for example, Nazism is immoral. Communism is immoral. They should say that. But exactly who you should vote for to defeat communism or Nazism is way beyond their ability to determine. Unless you got someone who's clearly some kind of fanatic or racist that's clear cut. He takes a racist policy. You could say, don't vote for that guy. But between who should replace the guy, that really is the job of an educated citizen using the criteria that he learns from Christianity to apply, but not really for the church. This goes all the way back. This theology has been developed even in the Middle Ages. The idea of the two swords. There's the sword of the Spirit that the church wields, and then there's the sword of the king, okay, that the king has to rule. The church can tell the king he's wrong, if he's doing something that's clearly immoral, but the church it can't really properly tell the king within reason it's exactly where he should peg the minimum wage. That's something that, educated people with much more knowledge should determine. So I hope that helps. Anything else? No, okay. All right, folks, next week should be a real humdinger, and Father John will lead the way there. And Rudy and Dorena and I, will be there to add our $2 or 2 cents in as well. But thanks, good seeing you all, and thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you. And welcome back.
Thank you.
So good having you back here.